Hello, everybody. My name is Nachiket, and we are here today with Kavita Kurunganti. She's associated with ASHA, the Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture, which is a part of the AIKSCC, which is the All India Kisan Sangharsh Coordination Committee, which in turn is a part of the Samyukt Kisan Morcha that has been talking with the government in the ongoing farmer agitations. So before we begin, Kavita, maybe you could tell us a bit more about ASHA. Is it an NGO? What is ASHA exactly?
Asha is not an NGO. There's been some posters that have been shared around by some groups in the recent past calling Asha Kisan Swaraj as an NGO. It is not. It is an alliance of individuals and organizations. And the alliance includes farmer organizations, it includes some farmer producer organizations, some NGOs, some community based organizations, and also market entities, social enterprises, including not for profit social enterprises and so on, but all in the field of agriculture. The byline of this platform or this alliance is food, farmers, and freedom. The concern of this alliance is primarily about empowerment of farmers, sustainable farm livelihoods, and about autonomy and freedom of farmers being protected. That is what this is. This is not an NGO. It is not funded. It is not into accepting projects and implementing them. It doesn't have employees. All of us are volunteers, but it is an organization. It's a platform uh, that is quite wary of corporatization of Indian agriculture, and by promoting sovereign ecological agriculture. It seeks to promote sustainable and autonomous farmer livelihoods. That is what this alliance is about. And it focuses on invisible and marginalized farmers like women farmers, Adivasi farmers, tenant farmers, and so on. So our work in this alliance is about environmental sustainability. It's about economic viability in agriculture. It is also about social equity. And that is where we call ourselves an alliance for sustainable and holistic agriculture.
Yeah. So
If,
Kavita is the
if I may add,
convener of.
sorry,
Yeah.
Nachiket, if I
Yeah.
may add,
Yeah.
Asha Kisan Swaraj does not espouse any one political ideology. We are neither left nor right. You know, the leftists might think that we are with them, and the Swadeshi folks might think, both the Gandhian Swadeshi and the right wing Swadeshi folks might think that we are with them. And we work with everyone when it comes to farmer interests being protected. But Asha itself, one, is not affiliated to any political party, and it does not espouse any one particular political ideology. It is about a broad spectrum of ideologies which are centered around farmer empowerment and sustainable farm livelihoods and food safety as key concerns. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd just like to add, so as viewers know that Kavita is the convener of ASHA, and she has also been a part of all the negotiations that have been going on with the government. So to begin with, the farmer agitation has really come into the larger public consciousness all over India only on November 26th, after so late November and then December onwards. But these laws have been around. I mean, the ordinance was passed in June, and then the parliament passed it in September. So why now? Why have the farmers started protesting only now?
Well, it so happens that the rest of India and the world has got to know about the farmers' protest only after they started reaching Delhi, and they started their sit-in at the Delhi borders. But these protests have been underway from June and July itself, and not just in Punjab. way down in South India, in Tamil Nadu, in July itself, there have been a lot of protests, and the Prime Minister's office would have surely received thousands of representations on the so-called reforms that were brought in the name of ordinances at that point of time. So the protests have not begun in November. They began quite early, months before November, and they only kept building up and spreading all over the country. And we saw many agitations in Karnataka, in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh, even during the lockdown period. The government brought in these, legal reforms in the name of reforms in the agriculture sector in June initially, and later on as laws in September, as you said. And even during the lockdown, farmers didn't hesitate to come out onto the streets and protest, because it's a matter of life and death of another kind for them. It is also important to note that preceding this round of protests were protests that India witnessed in 2017 and 18, which were also unified struggles by farmer unions cutting across their union and organizational alliances. And we saw in Madhya Pradesh, in Mandsaur, farmers getting killed in police firing and later in police custody. In Maharashtra, there were huge protests. In other states, there were protests. And these were for minimum support price as a legal entitlement, as well as freedom from indebtedness for farmers. If other sectors can have concepts like bankruptcy and so on, why not a very risky enterprise like agriculture? So the context in which these protests have to be understood is that farmers had been protesting over the recent years for something that they sought as their entitlements. The government ignored them, and they went in the completely opposite direction despite the government's own commitments when they brought in these reforms. And that is where the frustration and anger of the current day protests has to be understood.
So tell us a bit about these reforms, if I can put them in quotes. I mean, I don't think anyone has been happy with the status quo as it was earlier. Everyone has been asking for reforms. So what is in the content of these laws? Why is it that the farmers are unhappy with these laws?
I think we should begin with the term reforms itself. It's usually understood in a macroeconomic policy context of greater liberalization. It is understood as freedom from license Raj and inspection Raj and so on. And in the context of market inefficiencies, as economists call them, it is about so-called improvements in the way markets function. That is how reforms are understood. But, for many of us, that's a very limited term, and that's not how we understand reforms. We are also seeking reforms, but we are seeking reforms in a farmer-centric way, in a citizen-centric way. And the reforms would have to deliver greater empowerment and greater benefits for the most marginalized citizens. So it's not about market inefficiencies there. Market imperfections, or the fact that there are huge market inequalities and iniquities, would have been the center stage of reforms in the context of reforms that I'm talking about. So when Indian farmers, for instance, face dumping from highly subsidized produce elsewhere, the term reforms from the government side and from some mainstream economist side is not applied in that context. Whereas for me and for many of us, reforms are about addressing issues like that it's already an level playing field. It's an unequal playing field, and you're skewing it further against the marginalized citizen, against the farmer. And reforms certainly are needed. And those are the kinds of reforms that we had been talking about for years now. We do want, these structural inequities in the name of liberalized international trade to be addressed, for instance. The structural inequities between big capital and the small marginal farmer to be addressed, for instance. And this inequity is only increasing over the decades, as everyone knows. So our understanding about reforms is different. We are for reforms, but we are for reforms that bring in farmer level economic viability, for dignified lives and livelihoods. We are for environmental sustainability and reforms that will bring in environmental sustainability. We are for social equity and reforms that will empower and visibilize marginalized farmers. Those are the kinds of reforms that we want. And the ones who talk about reforms for agriculture sector should realize that their reforms for the sector are different from the livelihoods based reforms approach that many of us have in our minds. So when reforms are not backed by core principles of democracy, let me for a moment agree to the kind of mainstream economist advocacy for reforms, for instance. I want to say that even that is not tenable if such a reform is not backed by deeply democratic processes, because you are endangering those reforms that you're ramming down people's throats when it is not palatable, when it is not acceptable. There will be protests. There will be protests of the kind that you're witnessing today. And you're creating an unpredictable setting, even for the kind of investments and other things that you are looking for. So, other than redefining what constitute reforms, I am also emphasizing the processes of democracy that has to govern any kind of reform, whether it is a limited kind of reform or whether it's a larger kind of reform.
And what about the content of these laws? What exactly is problematic?
Well, why are farmers protesting against these laws when seemingly they have been given greater freedom? Because that is the narrative being spun by the government as well as advocates for these reforms. That's a question that has been answered in many ways by farmers, protesting farmers themselves, by farmer unions, from academics, from economists and others who are contesting the current set of reforms. It is basically a questioning around whether you can have the kind of deregulation that has been brought in, and the kind of uh, you know different and unequal parallel market structures that have been brought in the name of reforms, and whether they will in the end actually free up farmers and benefit them, or even consumers or not. That is the core point of contention, if you like, about these laws. Is deregulation, where the government is saying that it will not stand on behalf of marginalized citizens, that it will no longer care for the protection of those citizens, that we will not invest, but we hope others will invest when we turn our heads away in a deregulated market space. Whether all of these are actually backed by evidence, whether these things deliver benefits to farmers or not. So the opposition is to the deregulation that has happened, to the very objective and the direction, the policy direction in which these changes have taken India further towards. Not that these changes were not happening over a period of time, And it is also against the underlying assumptions that are faulty and baseless. That is what the contention around these laws is about.
Okay, so we'll just get into maybe some details about the kind of proposals that have been put during the negotiations in a bit. But if you could first tell us what exactly happens when you go for these talks with the governments, what is a typical negotiation like?
Uh, I must confess that I am basically from an urban middle class background. I am not a farmer myself, but I see myself as a humble karyakarta of farmers of this country, of all kinds of farmers in this country, but mostly of the marginalized farmers of this country. And from that background, I find that these talks reflect a certain rural Indian idiom in the conversations that happen, the grammar of the conversation, and the very approach in which these conversations happen. That means that there are comfortable spells of silences also during the conversations. There are breaks taken wherever they are needed so that further internal consultations of the government delegates between themselves or of the farmer delegates between themselves can take place. So the ones who are watching might actually be saying, oh, they've been inside for 6 hours, for 7 hours. But in reality, maybe the spoken conversation would happen for only a part of that time. And other than the key four demands that have been on the table from the beginning, and let me say this very, very strongly and clearly, the farmers have not changed their goalposts at all. These things have been there from the time the ordinances have been brought in. Maybe there's been a bit of change in the nuanced way in which these demands have been articulated as more and more groups, farmer groups join the platform, but their goalposts have not changed. And those agenda items get discussed, and that include repealing of the three central farm acts. And when we're talking about the repeal in relation to the Essential Commodities Act, we are not talking about the 1955 Act having to be repealed. We're talking about the 2020 Amendment Act, which brought in amendments to certain sections and provisions having to be repealed. So agenda 1 is repeal of the three central farm acts. Agenda 2 is minimum support price as a legal entitlement for all farmers in all their market interfaces. Agenda number 3 is that of keeping farmers out of the penal and regulatory provisions when it comes to one recent law in the form of ordinance that has been passed by the central government with regard to Delhi air pollution, a commission being set up for tackling Delhi's air pollution. And lastly, there's a draft electricity amendment bill that the central government had put out in April 2020. And farmers are pointing out that the draft bill is in a completely wrong shape as far as farmers as well as domestic consumers are concerned, and that it has to be withdrawn. These are the four agenda items that are discussed uh, for most part of the conversations in these negotiations. But remember, in addition to that, there are things that are brought up. For instance, the government might want to talk about how farmer friendly it is by bringing up RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and to say that, you know, it's taken a bold step in keeping India out of the RCEP, for instance. Farmers might want to point out to the government that there's a breakdown of law and order in the protest sites, or let's say street lights not being functional, or some logistical arrangements related to not enough toilets for women having been arranged, for instance. There's been a time when a lot of young people infiltrated the protest sites, and when questioned in the middle of the night, and when questioned by the protesting farmers, they actually admitted that the local police station had sent them, for instance. So farmer union leaders would have brought up all those details, and maybe 15 minutes goes into talking about, do we have a list of those people, which police station, making calls right there and then, things like that. Telling the center that state governments are behaving very badly in terms of police repression, whether it is Uttar Pradesh, whether it is Uttarakhand, whether it is Madhya Pradesh, or any other state. We saw in Bihar, police lathi charge where people were seen bleeding from the lathi charge. And so the center tries to sidle away from responsibility by saying that, well, this is a state subject, we don't get into it. But then we point out that you have the ability to reach out to state governments and insist that nothing like this should be happening. Even the Supreme Court, in its recent orders, has upheld the democratic fundamental right of farmers to protest, to reach Delhi, for instance. So, we paid obituary to dozens of farmers who got martyred, who had to sacrifice their lives. It's a very big expense to pay for the ongoing struggle happening. So together, the government folks in the hall also stood up and paid their respects with 2 minutes silence. So many things, and there's humor. There's of course humor during the talks. When the ministers ate the langar ka prasad in one of the talks, after coming back, all the farmer leaders encouraged them to show daleri now. Now that they've eaten langar ka prasad, are they bold enough to announce a repeal? Show your boldness. And, there's humor. There's several issues that are relevant to farmers that are getting discussed. Let's say the government brings the example of one farmer having received so-called justice through the SDM mechanism. We show many news articles that show how traders have, taken farmers' produce and disappeared without paying them money worth crores of rupees in Madhya Pradesh, several instances like that. So the veracity of data gets questioned. That side says something, our side questions it. So there are many things that are being discussed as the talks unfold. But the core things is around the 4 demands that are on the table.
Yeah, so as we are recording this today, 6th January, and at least in principle, 2 of those demands have been met. And the ones that are still to be discussed is the question of repeal of the laws and legalizing MSP. So let's get into that a bit. First, on the repeal. There are a lot of questions. Many people ask, why can't the laws be amended? Why is it necessary to repeal? So could you, explain that a bit? Why the objection to amendments?
Let me state a few reasons as to why these laws cannot and should not be amended, and why repeal is the only answer. Point number 1, the kind of reforms that the center wants to bring in are reforms that are already underway for many years now, but these have been brought in a somewhat organic, incremental fashion by state governments based on their situation and their comfort levels, or even political expediency. And Many states, for instance, have already allowed private markets. Many states have already allowed contract farming. They have allowed direct marketing. They've allowed electronic trading, for instance. These are the kinds of reforms that have been under discussion in this country. And these changes have been brought in as legal changes over the years in most states. It's not even just a few states that we're talking about. So the first reason is that the center has absolutely no reason to get involved to ram uniform changes across the country. And in these laws, in the objects and reasons statement, in black and white, the government of India is saying that reforms have not been brought in uniformly. Sorry, reforms should not be brought in uniformly. Just like production systems in this country are enormously diverse, just like farmers are not a monolithic category, they are enormously diverse. Markets are also enormously diverse in this country, and one size does not fit all. And the center better realize it. So, reason number one is that when reforms are underway, taking cover under the COVID lockdown and adopting undemocratic, unparliamentary processes of lawmaking, the center had no business to bring in these laws. So they better repeal it. That's point number one. Point number two, let's talk about the constitutional validity of the center bringing in such laws. The center says that they have taken refuge in item number 33, as it's called, in the 7th schedule of Indian Constitution, which classifies which subjects belong to the union, which subjects belong to the states, and which are on the concurrent list. So item number 33 is on the concurrent list. And the center says that it has every right to bring in laws like this under item number 33. Whereas we are pointing out that agriculture itself is a state subject, item 14 of the 7th schedule. We're talking about markets. Trade is not what we are talking about. As far as farmers are concerned, these are about markets for them having been changed legally. And markets is a state subject. Markets and fairs is a state subject as per Indian Constitution. And thirdly, intrastate trade, the first point of interface for most trade in this country, even if we were to assume that this is about trade, when farmers sell and not about markets, it is intrastate trade that happens. It's not as though some buyer somewhere else knows which farmer is in which obscure village and buying from them. So we are arguing that all of this is under the state government's purview as per the 7th schedule. And the center says, okay, we can go on and on. In the talks, a lot of time actually went into these legal arguments, back and forth, back and forth. So the center is now going on saying that, look, in any case, the Supreme Court will decide it. If you want, you can also go to the Supreme Court rather than protest. If you want to discuss only the constitutional validity. Fair enough. The Supreme Court has to pick up some pending petitions that are lying with it on the constitutional validity issues, though those petitions are essentially about ordinances and not the acts that got enacted. Be that as it may, this government is a government that talks a lot about good governance. And one of the key principles in good governance is both administrative and political accountability being close to citizens and not being far away in Delhi, in the central space, for instance. So just for that reason, given the geographical and socio-economic conditions of this set of citizens in India, farmers in rural India, mostly illiterate and so on and so forth, it makes immense sense for these kinds of issues being placed with state governments from a good governance point of view. And that's reason number two. which I think our constitution makers knew and had kept in mind when they gave agriculture as a state subject. So that still is point number two. Point number three, the very objective and the very policy direction of these laws is wrong and faulty. It is about deregulation. It is about a contention that says that farmers and poor consumers no longer need the government protection and that they can deal with both the traditional traders in the local markets as well as big capital, big corporations, including large MNCs, whether it is Archer Daniel Midlands, it is about Cargill, or whether it is about our own Adanis and Ambanis, that they can deal with them directly without the center having to protect them. This very assumption and objective, if it is wrong, and if it is done in the name of private investment and so on, then tinkering with a few sections here and there, making amendments and so on, will not work. Let me take one concrete example. The government has proposed to amend this whole SDM based grievance redressal mechanism and said, oh, you want farmers to have access to civil courts also. We will give that to you. We are ready to make that amendment. So our question is, after deregulating the markets and after saying that you don't care about exploitation of farmers, and you're very understanding of how many different ways farmers get exploited in the markets is so narrow, you're saying we'll now allow you to go to civil courts. How does that help? You have not prevented exploitation of farmers, but you're saying you can go to civil courts. How can farmers deal with either the courts or the SDM mechanism when they are first made vulnerable to exploitation? So how is an amendment along those lines acceptable when repeal is the only thing that should be done in that example that I've given? And I can pick up each amendment and point out that this is not a deep enough change. You have not understood that we have asked for a deeper concern and issue that we are confronted with. Then comes this issue about the underlying assumptions. And I'll speak from an economics perspective for just a minute. The assumption that these changes will bring in greater competition is highly questionable. When markets are fragmented, when markets become invisible, when you have dismantled the real competitive bidding and auction process that happens in a mandi. For instance, if you were really concerned about competition, why did you not ask all the Adanis, Ambanis, and anyone else to come into the mandi space and bid there, for instance? That will increase competition. That should improve prices for farmers, for instance. So your assumption about more competition, more contestability, better prices, and so on, it is not happening in these reforms. So how will amendments work? Only repeal will work. Let me move to my fifth reason why amendments are not acceptable. And this is a very, very solid, I would say, law and order and democratic issue why amendments won't work, which is that if the government had talked about amendments 7 months ago in June and July, when farmers had started protesting, then maybe farmers who were on the railway tracks in Punjab or let's say in Freedom Park in Karnataka, they may have listened to it. Now that they have been maligned, discredited, the trust deficit has expanded quite a bit. Amendments are just not acceptable to lakhs of protesting farmers across the country. And they are not going to stop protesting. They are not going to budge from the streets until you give a full repeal. Only a repeal will do and nothing else will do, and the government better accept it. A sixth reason, the government, by proposing some amendments, including saying that, we will, they actually more or less use this term in the talks also. You are talking about difficulties with two parallel markets. We will try and equalize these markets and so on. When you are realizing that parallel markets won't work and you have to equalize them, and you have partially accepted it by saying, you'll bring in amendments, you might as well accept that there could be many things wrong, and many things being wrong have been pointed out by many people. Just go back to the drawing board. Why do you want to tinker with this? And an additional reason is that governments know very well that in lawmaking, when a bill is expected to bring in a lot of changes, when a bill is first introduced in the parliament, and let's say a standing committee, after elaborate consultations, says that, we make all these recommendations and all these things have to change about the bill, governments take back that bill and reintroduce a new bill. This is standard procedure in lawmaking. They don't move a laundry list of amendments. And these are laws that are precisely at that stage, the Central Farm Acts. So why don't you adopt standard lawmaking procedures, including the fact that standard good lawmaking requires you to put out draft bills for public feedback, to hold consultations with key stakeholders, and only then talk about a bill being introduced in the parliament. You've gone wrong with your basic elements of good lawmaking. You better accept it and repeal this. And one last thing that we want to say to those who are saying, why don't you just accept amendments? This is, a maximalist position. This is, my way or highway position, and so on and so forth. The government to this day has not shown any evidence as to whether India's farmers' incomes or prices will crash, will not improve without these laws. Where is that evidence which supports the reasons as to why the government should not repeal? Whereas there is already evidence from the past 7-8 months that prices have crashed, that trading has moved out from regulated markets, that farmers are not even able to protest in a collective manner that we used to witness earlier in the mandi physical spaces, because they got to know when prices were crashing. We already know what this is leading to, not just from evidence from Bihar and from other countries and so on, but from the implementation of these very acts, whereas the government is not able to show any evidence as to why it will not and cannot repeal in terms of empirical evidence of benefits. So there are many reasons why these acts should be repealed, and amendments are just not good enough. The government better accept it and give this to farmers before more lives are lost.
Thanks. That clarifies things quite a bit. Now, assuming, and this is a big if, but assuming now the government agrees to repeal the laws, uh, it's not like the earlier status quo was very desirable either. And
Right.
uh, everyone has been asking for that also to be changed. So one of the demands, the fourth demand you were talking about, has been about the legal MSP, legalizing MSP, minimum support price. On this also, the government has been saying it will give return assurances that the current procurement at MSP will continue. So one is, why is that assurance not enough? And second is, could you explain what this demand exactly is? What does legalizing MSP mean exactly?
Yeah, so I think every protesting farmer out there will admit that improvements need to be made in the existing market interfaces that they experience. They would like more competition. They would like better prices being offered. They would like greater oversight, faster grievance redressal. All these things is what farmers and farmer unions will agree to. And one of the key things that everyone will talk about is the guarantee that they get remunerative prices. And we are not talking just about MSP. We're talking about, a farmer household recovering what it has invested in a season, its cost of production, is not adequate, because you will need that money to invest back in the next season, obviously, for the same enterprise, and the family has to run. There are so many other costs: education, health, basic lifestyle expenses, and so on. So we are talking about a remunerative price having to be ensured for all farmers. And the government is saying on the MSP demand that it will give a written assurance on the existing MSP and procurement regime continuing. But that is simply not adequate. I mean, why do we even need a new written assurance from the government when on the very floor of the parliament, in a budget speech in 2018, Mr. Arun Jaitley, as the finance minister, said that the government has heard the demand of farmers around MSP, and it will now give A2 plus FL, which is paid out cost plus value of family labor put in, plus a 50% margin added, and that it will ensure that such an MSP is actually realized by all farmers. So that is, to me, for instance, I would assume that it is equal to a written assurance. Why do we need one more written assurance when you have already failed in that parliamentary commitment that you have made? So why should we depend on a new piece of paper on which you will write the same thing and give to farmers? Farmers are not asking that, nor will farmers depend on that written piece of paper. They realize that there are many things wrong with the current MSP and procurement regime. The MSP is not being determined in a fair manner. It goes unfair both in terms of cost calculations, how much is the actual cost of production, as well as the margin that is added on the cost, where they're saying it's not A2 plus FL, but we are talking about the comprehensive cost of production, which is C2, on which we want a margin, and at least 50%. And the government, 50% is not sacred. In fact, if you want to incentivize particular crops, you can give a greater margin, let's say for oil seeds, for millets, and so on. So the MSP regime is wrong in terms of costing and what margins and what cost formulae are being used. And the actual realization of that is not happening for most farmers of this country, for most commodities. For paddy and wheat, in a few pockets, a few farmers tend to benefit. Having said that, we should also realize that even if the direct benefit is being enjoyed by a small set of farmers, indirectly, MSP gives a price signal to the mandi, and the mandis give a price signal to the unregulated markets, where the invisible farmers are trading, are selling their produce. And today's demand of farmers is that that remunerative MSP with the farmers commission formula of at least C2 plus 50% has to become a legal entitlement for all farmers in all their market interfaces. And that means that any commodity that's sold from agriculture by a farmer in the market should first give that farmer C2 plus 50%. And anything more than that is welcome. And if that does not happen, there should be an obligation on the government, both the central government and the state governments, to make good that part of the entitlement that did not get fulfilled. So they are talking about a legal entitlement with regard to remunerative prices. And for that legal entitlement to be realized, obviously a set of things has to be done, including a institutional architecture, which has to be put into place, which is not there today. Nobody is accountable and responsible for prices not having been realized by farmers. And we need a institutional architecture for that. And all of this can come in a new statute, a new legislation. That is what farmers are asking for.
So, if one has to envision how this will be operationalized, uh, does it mean that the government has to buy all the produce of every farmer? I mean, how do you see this being operationalized?
So the ones,
Otherwise, one hears about very high numbers and where's the money going to come from? So
yeah,
exactly how do you think this can be put into practice?
yeah. So very often when the MSP as a legal entitlement demand is raised, there are many people who immediately say that, it's just not possible, both for financial reasons and for administrative practical reasons, that the government buys in and steps in and buys the all the produce of the last farmer of this country. And that is not what farmers are asking for. That's the first clear clarification that one is making. We are not talking about the government procuring everything, but the government standing guarantee for all purchases that are made in any marketing channel from a farmer. That is what one is talking about. So we are talking about a basket of measures having to be put into place and having to be strengthened for this entitlement to be realized and for the actualization or operationalization of this law. That includes expanded procurement. Today, the government procures mainly two grains, and this government immediately corrects a person who's saying that, to show that no, no, in our tenure, we have procured so much of pulses, so much of oil seeds, PM Asha. True. In the recent past, there's been greater procurement, but there's been no guarantee that it will continue. And there's been no budgetary outlays that will secure such procurement. And that needs to change. We want expanded procurement of grains other than paddy and wheat. Uh, and we want smarter procurement. We want smarter and timely market intervention. The government procures not for its own use in its food schemes, but it also intervenes in the market as a player to prop up prices, and that's called market intervention. And we need smarter market intervention to happen whenever prices are crashing. We want international trade to be agreed upon in a non-compromising fashion, so that farmers in India don't get priced out. That's also an equally important measure that has to be taken. We need cost of production to be brought down, so that prices that have to be guaranteed as an obligation can actually be lower. If diesel prices are so high, obviously MSP will be high, for instance. If sustainable farming practices are not adopted, and the government only looks at a chemical agriculture paradigm, prices will be high, for instance. So we need cost of production to be brought down. And importantly, we need all private trader purchases to begin at the MSP and the floor price to be that. Look, in all auctions all over the world, the seller has the right to reserve a price. You go to the most celebrated auctions in this world, for instance, or the most obscure auctions that happen in a village setting, the seller begins by saying, I'm looking for at least this much, and you can bid above that. So why can't farmers' produce have a minimum reserve price, which is a remunerative MSP, and all auctions to be only about that. And I've been speaking to, and incidentally, this is a recommendation that came from the Ashok Dalwai committee. Remember, there's been a doubling farmers' income committee, which has been set up in India, and it had brought long set of reports with recommendations. And one of the recommendations there is that all auctions in a legal manner have to begin with a MRP, but they, of course, said that that MRP, which is a minimum reserve price for an auction, the floor price for an auction, should be A2 plus FL. We don't agree. So we can negotiate about what that price should be. But the principle has already been recommended in government's own DFI report, Doubling Farmers Income Report. And I have been speaking to several traders and trader associations, and they say that if there is a pan-India price, they don't uniform price, they don't mind a law being imposed on them, which mandates that their auction price has to begin at that price, because then they will just add their cost margins and sell it onward, and they don't see a problem with it. So what we are talking about is a one nation, one price situation, not one nation, one market. These reforms in any case didn't bring in one nation, one market. They brought in one nation, multiple markets. Whereas what we are talking about is one nation, one price, which is the remunerative MSP for every commodity. And it doesn't have the kind of financial implications that everyone is fearing, for the simple reason that even today, most marketing of agriculture produce is outside the ambit of the government procurement. The government procures only a small quantity of the marketed surplus in this country. And if you have traders, bidding from MSP, then it's not a responsibility on the government to buy that produce. So these fears are exaggerated. And in the National Food Security Act of 2013, we have already secured the interests of poor consumers to an extent. Obviously, it has not given nutrition security to poor consumers. It's only about 2-3 grains, and even that millets component has not been actually operationalized in most states. But having said that, the Food Security Act can be used and improved to ensure that poor consumers need not suffer. And for all those who can afford to pay for better prices for food, we should insist upon it, because cheap food is at the core of several problems that are there today, including of poverty in this country. Cheap food essentially mean that the producers don't get adequate purchasing power, which in turn affects the overall economy. It also means that they are not able to pay their workers minimum wages, for instance. So we need to move away from this concept of cheap food, except for the ones who really deserve it. And there we need a universalized approach, with the ones who don't need it opting out. And we have seen it happen in other spheres of the economy. But we don't have to worry about the financial implications of MSP as a legal entitlement, as it is being exaggerated right now.
Yeah, so I had 6 points to ask about MSP that usually come up. Many of them you have already covered, like how do we deal with budgetary constraints, or international market prices, or even domestic market prices. All this you have already covered. or even food inflation affecting the poor. But one other alternative often posed is income support schemes like PM Kisan. So why not PM Kisan instead of MSP?
So what we are finding in this country is that there is not even a database of actual farmers and producers in this country. And when you don't even know who all are your farmers, including landless laborers, and that's the definition of a farmer as per the national policy for farmers in the country. When you don't know who is supposed to be supported with income support, to assume that that will address the problems being faced by the most marginalized farmers, it would be a wrong thing to assume. And the only assumption that will work until we figure out whether we know the last farmer in this country and how do we go about it. Some of us have some thoughts on it, but it has not been operationalized in this country. Until that is set into place, we can only assume that there are farmers who are actually engaging in production of agricultural commodities, including milk and in the livestock sector, meat and fisheries and so on, and that they will have market interfaces for their livelihood. And you need to do something solid to make sure that that market is not unfair to them. And therefore, at this point of time, it is not as though we don't believe in income guarantee approach. That should also be brought in into the Indian agricultural setup. But even when you adopt a income guarantee approach, the most direct and proximal way by which the government can deliver on those incomes is not by your meager 6,000 rupees transfers to landed farmers in this country, but by actually price support. And it's well known that good prices have a direct and higher, more significant impact on farm incomes than any other measure. And when agricultural incomes improve, poverty reduces in a country significantly. That's the one of the best routes to address poverty. All of this is known. There is empirical evidence to this effect. And therefore, I think we should not ignore the issue of remunerative prices being guaranteed.
Okay, so now suppose the government agrees on this demand of legalizing MSP, then what is the next step? Like, in terms of concrete demand, or in terms of actualizing this demand, when the negotiations are taking place, what do you think if the government agrees in principle, what next on the MSP demand?
So what we would like to see is the government say that it agrees to the MSP legal entitlement demand in principle. They've not done it so far. We would like them to say, yes, such a guarantee should be given by the government legally to all farmers. That's the first step. In All India Kisan Sangharsh Coordination Committee, in 2017 and 18, elaborate processes were run, starting from a Mahila Kisan Sansad on Parliament Street, with lots of women farmers, 500 and about 580 odd women farmers who assembled, and the very first draft of a guaranteed remunerative price bill was tabled in that Mahila Kisan Sansad in 2017 November, after which AIKSCC ran state level and district level processes in nearly all states of India to consult with legal experts, farmer unions, individual farmers, activists, human rights activists, economists, and others. And as a final leg of that process, also consulted word by word, line by line, clause by clause, with 21 political party representatives. And under the leadership of Mr. Sharad Pawar, we sat for a whole day in the Parliament House Annexi to look at this bill and give it a final shape. And that bill got tabled as a private member's bill, both in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha in 2018. To begin with, that's a good enough bill for the government to look at because it came from elaborate processes and it incorporated into the bill with a schedule attached to the bill some key recommendations that came out of the Rameshan committee report, of which I was a member. In 2013, there was a committee that was formed by the UPA government, which then gave a report during the NDA government tenure in 2015. It stretched over 2 years. And this committee's main task was to come up with a MSP fixing formula for this country. And there we went into great details of figuring out what's wrong with the cost estimations when it comes to cost of production estimations for even the 23 crops that are done. So we incorporated the Rameshan committee recommendations also into this AIKSCC bill. So the three main aspects that are going wrong with prices, which is cost estimations, a formula over and above the cost, comprehensive cost for the prices to be remunerative and binding on the government, and then the operationalization part until the last farmer who's interfacing with the markets realizes that price. All the three elements have been incorporated, including a sound institutional architecture which empowers state governments. The center has to put in the funds and the state governments have the main implementation responsibility for this has been created. I think a good beginning point is to look at that draft law, improve it quickly if required, and then enact it in India.
Thank you. You've given a lot of time and explained things in detail. In closing, you've been one of the people who has been in the center of all the action, and you've probably have a bird's eye view of things. So, how would you reflect on this whole farmer movement that has gone on so far? Any thoughts you want to share about this whole uprising that has taken place?
I just want to say that this has been really unique and unparalleled in India's history, not just of farmers' movements, but of people's movements. And I don't think we can compare this equally with what is called as the Anna movement against corruption in this country, or the Jallikattu movement that we had seen in Tamil Nadu, where a whole uh, community of Tamilians in that case, was standing up to protect its identity and its culture and so on. We see some parallels from these earlier movements. Maybe there's some parallel from the boat club movement that farmer movements remember. But I think what we are seeing today is unparalleled in terms of the peaceful manner that these protests are going on. The fact that it's one set of people who are staying put for this long a time. Today is day 43 already. And I think, have seen a certain fleeting participation of citizens in the other movements, not this kind of a steadfast, determined participation. And I think very, very importantly, one key distinction is that today you go to Singhu border or Tikri border or anywhere at Delhi's borders and talk to a protesting farmer who's 15 kilometers from the stage, let's say, and ask that person why she or he is sitting in without moving and going back home. And even from them, you will hear their analysis of at least a few provisions of these laws. They have educated themselves about what the issue is. These are literate farmers in that sense. They have legal literacy about these three central acts, and they are able to present to you very, very valid perspectives on why they are resisting sitting there. And I think I have not seen this kind of a educated, literate movement when I compare this with other movements. And I must say that even the media, though there's, the usual suspects who are being unsympathetic and so on, but most media has been forced to cover this with respect and with the recognition of the dignity of the people who are sitting there, despite the best efforts of the retractors, including the government, including of BJP, of calling the protesters by various names and so on. So I am someone who's humbled by what is unfolding right now, and it's been an enormous learning opportunity for a humble Kisan Karyakarta like me. And I hope to remember these lessons in future work for farmers' interests in this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Let's all hope that the government comes around to agreeing with these demands soon. It's already been too long and the weather is being quite harsh. So let us hope that this doesn't have to carry on for much longer. Thank you very much for your time. Uh, Thank you.
Thank you, Nachike.